without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jim Gallagher. My family and I have known him for years, many, many years. Where was the place up in Montville where you taught us to dance?
St. John's Church, I think.
We were there. You attempted to show us how to dance. He's an Irish scholar. He knows everything. Him and Don Degnan would really have it out with their knowledge. So, I'd like to introduce him.
I'm gonna try, excuse me, I'm gonna try not to use the microphone. If you can't hear me, let me know. Right? Yeah, it's on, okay. Maybe I'll just, first thing I wanna do is just offer my condolences on the vandalism of your Hunger Memorial, or tragic, I'm trying to stay in touch with Jim McGetry on that. But I would tell you also that this morning I received an email. I'm working with a group here and in Ireland on educating the Irish about the Irish hunger. And I received an email this morning saying that the Dublin City Council and several members of the Dáil in Ireland are pushing to have the National Museum of Ireland have an exhibition on the hunger. It's just scandalous that they have nothing on in the National Museum. They have nothing at all on the Irish hunger. And we've been fighting this for a long time, but apparently now it looks like there's some political pressure going to be applied, and I don't know what's going to come out of it. Anyway, given that, my talk tonight is 100 Years Quest for Independence on the island of Ireland from 1918 to 2018. And I have to say, I had a little trouble researching this thing again, because years ago I used to be very familiar with everything going on. I spent a lot of time in the North myself, but over the last 10 years or so, I've kind of forgotten a lot of that stuff, or at least downplayed it. To have to go through it again was very troubling. It was torturous, as a matter of fact. So I'm not going to put you through that same torture. It'd be torture enough just to listen to me. But so, it won't be a blow-by-blow Irish history lesson. It's more a focus on the attempts that were made for independence and on impacts of events that occurred where the prospects for independence were impacted. I'm going to try to cite recurring events over the 100-year period that received the same British government and Northern Irish Protestant reactions, as we'll see. And we're now in one of those same situations. I'm going to use only one example prior to the 100-year period that set the stage for 1918, and that situation continues today. And I'm referring to the Protestants in the north of Ireland. In 1912, when Home Rule resurfaced and looked like it was going to be activated, the Protestants in Northern Ireland opposed it. And they went so far as to construct a covenant for a Northern Ireland government, a Protestant government, aside from the rest of Ireland. They formed their own paramilitary unit, UVF, and they imported arms from Germany. And they did all of this openly and daringly, and the British government didn't do a thing. But in 1914, finally, the British government ordered the British Army to suppress the Protestant actions in the north, and the Army refused, and nothing was done. There were no penalties at all. Well, the impact on the nationalist community then, they now fully realized that not only did the Brits favor the Protestants, but they're doing so militarily. And the situation became more aggravated after the 1916 Rising. So in 1918, now we'll start that 100-year period. In 1918, it was a general election. A 32-county vote, which is important. I'll come back to that much later. And because of the reaction after 1916 and the executions, whatever, there had been a dramatic change in the attitudes of the Irish people. And in this election, they voted for Sinn Féin. And they voted for a vote of independence of Ireland from Britain. But the British, even though it was a valid election, the British declared the results to be illegal. Well, but Sinn Féin went ahead. They formed the first Irish government, the Dáil, and Britain considered that to be treason. They conducted massive arrests of elected Sinn Féin members and imposed repressive policies in Ireland. Well, the Irish reaction to the British reaction of the election resulted in the 1919 War of Independence. Now, this was a war that involved the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, who were ex-World War I British soldiers, most of them unemployed. Most served, or maybe all of them served as mercenaries in this War of Independence, and as mercenaries were merciless as well. There was no military victory, but a truce was provided or offered by the British government. Before I get on, and that was the treaty. So before I get on to the treaty, I just want to say one other thing. In 1919, there was an opportunity for independence in Ireland, in the sense that the League of Nations met at Versailles, and the issue of small nation sovereignty was on the table. And now, if you remember, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson brought us into the war in World War I to support small nation sovereignty. Well, when the issue came up at the League of Nations, Wilson opposed it. The Irish submitted a proposal that they be considered to have their own sovereignty. And when the issue came up, Wilson opposed it. And Wilson, turns out, was a anti-Catholic bigot whose heritage was Northern Ireland Protestant. But it was a missed opportunity for independence, and one, however, that was out of the hands of the Irish themselves. One other quick thing, in 1919, the Irish Volunteers became the IRA, the official army of the new Irish government. All right, well anyway, that takes us back to the truce and the treaty. And the treaty is very much related to the 1912-1914 Home Rule issues that we just talked about before. Partition, of course, was one of the major items in that treaty, and the partition of Ireland into 26 counties that became the Irish Free State and 6 counties in the north of Ireland were based largely on religion. And that was to provide at least 60% versus 60% plurality for the Protestants, over 40% for the Catholics. And so it was done deliberately. The Ulster had 9 counties, where Northern Ireland has 6 counties. And the reason that Donegal, Monaghan, and Cavan were not included in the Northern Ireland group was because they were primarily Catholic, and they would have upset that 60-40 limit, so they became part of the Irish Free State. But it just bothers me, still does every day. I tell people Northern Ireland is not Ulster, don't use them interchangeably. But the other item was oath of allegiance to the Crown, and there was a third item of importance, and that was the payment, the annual payment of the annual land payments from the Irish government to the British government for money that was loaned in the late 19th century to allow Irish farmers to buy farms, to become landowners. And so it set up, and so that treaty then set up 2 parliaments, the Northern Ireland Parliament and the Irish Free State. But the Protestants in the north were given the opportunity to opt out of the treaty, which they did, and they formed their own parliament as part of the UK, just completely separate of this home rule issue, which they opposed to begin with. The Irish Free State, 26 counties were designated under the Dominion, designated as Dominion, part of the Dominion state. They were not independent. They were still under the UK aegis. And the treaty was finally signed and approved under the British coercion by Lloyd George, who threatened the Irish with war if they didn't sign the treaty. And that became the Government of Ireland Act in 1920. Well, that was followed then by, in the Irish Free State, by the Civil War, for the pro-treaty versus anti-treaty forces. The oath was more of an issue than partition. One of the reasons, it's believed, is that Lloyd George had told the Catholics that this partition is only temporary, don't worry about it. At the same time, he was telling the Protestants that it's permanent. And so I think the Irish, the pro-treaty Irish, believed that that was going to be resolved, and so there was more attention paid to the oath than there was to partition. I would say one thing about this, that for centuries the British knew that if they could throw more than one issue out in front of the Irish, that the Irish would fight amongst themselves. And that was the case here as well. And unfortunately, that's been the case ever since, and still is. But if I look at 1921 to the 1980s in the north of Ireland, that Northern Ireland Parliament, or that Northern Ireland 6 counties, Protestant nation for Protestant people. It was a carryover from the 1912-1914 period. There was a subjugation of Catholics, treated as second-class citizens. They weren't given housing, they weren't given jobs, denied housing, and they could not have a vote. It was not a one-man, one-vote issue or situation. They were not allowed, Catholics were not given jobs, not allowed to have jobs, and not having any money, they couldn't buy houses. So they were not given a vote. Whereas if you were Protestant, you got a vote. If you owned a house, you'd have a job. You owned a house, you got another vote. If you owned a business and property, you had a third vote. So Protestants could have 3, maybe even more votes than that. Catholics couldn't have any vote at all. And with gerrymandering that took on political districts, the Protestants dominated the whole scene in Ireland, even in those 2 counties where there was pretty near even Catholic and Protestant population. Well, one result, the Catholics were expelled from shipyards and engineering works. There was a curfew only in the Catholic neighborhoods. They had beast specials as part of the police who acted somewhat like the Black and Tans. And in all of this, there was no reaction from the British government. I mean, all of this was allowed to happen, no reaction from the British government. Conversely, in the Irish Free State, the Irish Parliament had proportional representation, so it was somewhat democratic. I look at 1930s to 1950s. In 1937, there was the Irish Constitution that proclaimed that Ireland was 32 counties, not 26 and 6. Even this is after the treaty. The Constitution proclaimed 32 counties. In the 1930s, there was an economic war in Ireland in the sense that the Irish government refused to continue paying the annual land payments. And with that, the British government decreased their imports, increased the tariffs, and it was a pretty bad recession in Ireland during that time period. Also in 1940s, in World War II, the Irish Free State declared neutrality. The Protestants in the north were irate, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall that there was either a telephone call or a radio exchange between De Valera and Churchill, where Churchill said, if you become an ally during the war, an ally of the British, we'll rescind partition. And De Valera, now I'm saying what I recall, and De Valera said to the effect, well, that will happen now then, right? And Churchill said, no, after the war. And so De Valera came back and in effect said, go to hell, you know, because he knew the deceit that would never happen. Just another topic on the independence aspect of it. But in 1949, the Irish Free State was declared a republic. And now the 26 counties was indeed politically independent. But in the UK, they formed the UK-Ireland Act, where they designated that the Northern Ireland would remain in the UK. In the 1950s, there was in the North, there was industrial economic benefit from World War II, but in the South, because of their neutral position, they did not have that economic benefit. There was, again, it was massive recession and large emigration, and much to this country in the 1950s. In that time period, the IRA started a campaign of bombing border posts that lasted up to about 1962. But one important thing, which I'm going to address here a little bit later, one important thing in 1955 is that TV came into Northern Ireland. All right, so from now on, I'm going to talk even more about the North, because that's the area of concern with respect to independence. In 1967, Catholics formed the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, and in 1968, 50 years ago, Catholics responded to 25 years of human and civil rights abuses by conducting nonviolent protests and marches, which were patterned after the civil rights marches in the US, as seen on the TV. So that TV that came to Ireland in 1955 had a definite impact on what transpired here now in the 1960s. Well, those nonviolent protests and marches were met by very violent police and partisan community response. Murders, beatings, neighborhoods burned down, Catholic neighborhoods burned down. And so in 1969, the British Army was called in to help the RUC keep peace. That didn't last very long, and the Army soon focused on the Catholic community and the conduct of curfews, intimidation, mass arrests, which included sweeping arrests of people who were suspected of being supporters of the IRA and thrown into jail. That was called the internment without trial. They weren't given any trial. They were caught, just taken out of their homes or wherever, put into jails for time period. That lasted until 1975. Well, as a result of all of that, the IRA, who had been latent at this period, surfaced in response to the British Army now being on Irish soil again. In 1971, the Ballymurphy Massacre, and 1972, the Bloody Sunday Massacre, both conducted by the British Paratroop Organization or unit, SAS. And that was so onerous that the Brits rushed that unit out of Ireland very quickly after the Bloody Sunday Massacre, so that they wouldn't be visible. But it was clear that the Northern Ireland government at the time could not hold down this violence. And so the Brits administered direct rule from Westminster at that time until about 1999. In 1973, at the Sunningdale Agreement, which was a milestone event because it talked about power sharing between Catholics and Protestants. But because Catholics were involved, Protestants were opposed. And they conducted public strikes, massive public strikes, and defeated the agreement. The British just acquiesced. In 1980-81, the hunger strikers died at Long Kesh, and that renewed national interest and action. So the divisions were increased as a result of that. In 1985, at the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was again a breakthrough politically, because the Republic was brought in and had the role of a consultant only, and no power, but as a consultant. Well, the Protestants objected to that too, and but the main objective, even though there was this play on, oh yeah, well, we'll have the Irish in and we'll do this and we'll do that. The main objective of the Anglo-Irish Agreement was to get the Irish Free State, to get the Republic, as well as the Irish government, to suppress the IRA. The focus was on keeping the IRA down. I'm going to say a brief word about collusion. It was a massive issue all throughout the North and from the 70s on. But I'll just say a couple of words here. Because all of this, the reason I'm mentioning all of these things is because of attitudes. As I mentioned before, the whole question of independence based upon interest, on attitude, and whether you have strong divisions or whether people are talking to each other. So you can see through all that we're talking about, the divisions have been increasing in intensity rather than being relaxed for the most part. And in collusion then, the British intelligence and security agents were colluding with Protestant paramilitaries in the killing of unarmed civilians. There wasn't a war, interestingly, from what I can read anyway, there wasn't a direct war by the British against the IRA. It was against the people who were supporting the IRA. They didn't want to call it a war. And so they went through all these other machinations, you know, side-swiping the issue of war. Anyway, I don't want to say they were successful at it, but nonetheless, the British government itself was involved in the killing of unarmed civilians. And then, as now, they're trying to protect those agents and personnel from legal consequences of state collusion by stonewalling, shielding or losing critical information in files, obstructing access ad nauseum. And the Irish government has been criticized because they have not demanded redress from the British government on collusion. Collusion issue is still a very active issue today. But today there are Catholic law firms in the North that are pursuing the collusion issues, the legacy issues. So at least something's being done, but it's not at the government level. Take me into the 1990s. In 1995, well, 1994, 97, there were IRA and partisan ceasefires. They didn't last all that long, but a number of them occurred, and so there was some hope each time there was a ceasefire. In 1995, the U.S. finally intervened with George Mitchell and President Clinton. And Britain didn't want U.S. intervention. And they considered Northern Ireland to be an internal issue. So they opposed the America coming in. But another reason being the Americans were concerned about the human rights issues, equality and whatever. All of those things were anathema to the British. But, and then George Mitchell mentioned there were 2 years of acrimonious negotiation to finally come up to the Good Friday Agreement. And he said something to the effect, we had 700 days of failures and one success. And the success was in 1998 in the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. And the Good Friday Agreement was approved by a 32-county vote. It was the second time in 80 years that there was a 32-county vote, the first one being the election in 1918. Well, just a quick thing about the Good Friday Agreement, since it's still a very active issue, and I'm going to come back to it again. There were 3 strands in the Good Friday Agreement. That is the Northern Ireland government, where they formed an executive and an assembly. There was a cross-border strand with Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And by the way, both Northern Ireland and the Republic were both in the EU, the European Union at that time. So this was allowed to happen under the aegis of the EU. And then the third one was the UK and Republic of Ireland cross-government actions. And I might just say here, most of these things didn't occur. Since then, this is 20 years now since the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. Most of those interactions have not occurred. Also under the agreement, Britain and Ireland were agreed to become impartial in their dealings with whatever in these intergovernment activities or any of the activities. And that's important. Just remember that impartial obligation that Britain agreed to. And also in the area of human rights, there was to be a Bill of Rights constructed following the European Civil Rights, ECHR. European, God darn it, I know what that was and I can't think of it. Anyway, but to follow the European model under the EU. Well, the Good Friday Agreement passed, but the DUP was opposed to it. And it turns out, in all of those activities, all these agreements, and then and now, it turns out that any talk about reconciliation or any movement towards reconciliation or something positive is opposed by the Protestants, the Protestant parties, political parties, because they see it as something undermining their advocacy issues, all of which are based on the word no. Someone said if the word no was not in the vocabulary, Northern Ireland Protestants would be mute. The 19th Amendment to the 1937 Constitution occurred in a referendum following the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. In that, the Articles 2 and 3 of the 37 Constitution, which said Ireland is 32 counties, was now amended to recognize England's role in the North. But the Irish government, to save face, came back and said, well, anybody born or living in the North or the South is Irish, or can consider themselves Irish citizens. But now here, in terms of independence, here's a step back, where before they had stated they were 32 counties, and now they're giving up, recognizing British role in the North. In 1999, it was the governance of the security items were transferred from London to Belfast. This is devolution of the security. But and as a result, direct rule was dissolved. In other words, this was a positive step. Direct rule was dissolved, but it was raised again in 2000, 2002, similar to the organizations in the Good Friday Agreement. They were out more than they were in. Anyway, the last thing I want to say about all of that part is the peace walls, which is just a thorn in my side, everybody's, I'm sure. Just even the term peace, which is a propaganda term, that I've seen them, I can't believe them, they're ugly. They're not peace, have nothing to do with peace at all, in the sense that it's not promoting peace. They're mainly walls that are set up to keep Catholics and Protestants away from each other, to keep them separated. And I understood that in Belfast there were like 13 or 14 of these peace walls. I was surprised to hear recently that they still exist, but also surprised that, and I never did see them in Derry, but supposedly there's peace walls in Derry, Portadown, Lurgan, a few other places in the north, as many as 59 peace walls in the north. I'm astounded at that number. I never saw that before. And you know, apparently nothing's being done about it. I guess they're working in that there's not more violence between Protestants and Catholics, but anyway, the word peace should not be in there. But I want to paraphrase a couple of things from George Mitchell on the Good Friday Agreement. He said, this is a step towards peace. It's not a peace agreement. And he said, you know, in the North, fear and anxiety are part of daily life, at home, work, and in school. Hate, atrocity, terror do major damage to the hearts and minds, and there's zero trust on either side. He said, so what's required is peace, tolerance, and mutual respect, voting for your children or for the future. Well, it's nice to say, but it hasn't happened really. But four basic principles have come out of that. And they are equality, respect, truth, and self-determination. The equality pertains to the Bill of Rights for the most part. Truth and justice pertain to the legacy issues and the inquests. And self-determination is for the people to decide what kind of government they want. This year, in 2018, those principles were embodied in the McGuinness Principles, and the Irish activist organizations are trying to educate our politicians with respect to the McGuinness Principles and how they should be used and should be enforced, or should be at least promoted in the north of Ireland. And that also means, or involves us. You and I should be working with our own politicians to make them aware, if they're not aware, to make them aware of the McGuinness Principles and demand that they do something about it, that they take some positive action. Well, again, bring us up to 2000 to the present. The Hillsborough Agreement in 2010, the Sinn Féin and DUP agreed on the devolution, and that was Paisley and Adams. Surprised everybody. So here was some hope at that time. Well, it didn't take very long. In 2016, England decided to secede from the European Union, and while Northern Ireland and Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, England ignored their votes, just like the 1918 election. And so whatever England says, Northern Ireland and Scotland are going to have to stay in line. DUP supported Brexit. And so this is important in the next couple of things I'm going to say. But in that process, there was an election in the UK in 2017. And in the north of Ireland, the Protestants only won one seat more than the Catholic politicians. So for the first time in history, there was no Protestant plurality to speak of. But there was also no parity of esteem, no respect, no equality, whatever. And Martin McGuinness, I guess, had gone as far as he could go in trying to make things work with the DUP. They were getting nowhere, and so he resigned. And with that resignation, the executive, now part of the Northern Stormont, the executive collapsed, and it's still collapsed. And the Brits are very wary about coming in with direct rule again, because it's not going to look good for them, particularly with Brexit. So, I don't know, playing a game over there, and I don't know what's going to happen. But in 2017, as part of that same election, the Conservative Party in Britain won the election, but they didn't have enough votes, enough seats to actually govern, and they had to form a coalition government. They needed 10 seats, 10 votes. And who had those 10 votes but the DUP? And so the Conservative Party joined forces with the DUP to retain control over British government. And I think there was a 1.4, I don't know if it was billion or million, but I think $1 billion bribe went along with that. Well, that joining of the DUP and Britain violated the Good Friday Agreement, because Britain promised to be impartial. And there's no way in hell they can be impartial now. And it turns out DUP has a major role in Brexit, which again I'll come to in a few minutes. A collision cover-up continued, trust stayed down. So things haven't changed very much. In Brexit now, one of the biggest problems, in a way I'm glad to see it, is the Irish border in Northern Ireland. But if a hard border, that is a border requiring guards and passes, whatever you could, visas and so forth, then Brexit will have a collateral damage impact on Ireland. Ireland stands to lose on this Brexit thing. And if they have the hard border, it may undo all of the peace efforts of the Good Friday Agreement. It'll provide or insulate, provide or provide, let me leave it at that. Provide instability, intensify divisions, intensify tensions, and probably lead to more violence, and more sectarian violence. Also, the human rights issues in Good Friday Agreement are being reduced or eliminated, and England has already said that they're going to reduce the human rights issues. They never did write a Bill of Rights. And lastly, it turns out that the consensus seems to be that the Brexit activities relating or pertaining to Ireland are being driven by the DUP because they have that 10-vote margin. I just want to read something quickly here. It's from a Brian Feeney of the Irish News dated September 19th, 2018. It's on this topic. The dismantling of the Good Friday Agreement has been taking place slowly for some years now, but has gathered pace since the dirty deal Theresa May did with the DUP last July. Slowly, the British government, recklessly encouraged by the DUP, has been dismantling the Good Friday Agreement. Most obviously, the British have abandoned the requirement for rigorous impartiality, and among other injunctions, full respect for parity of esteem and of just and equal treatment of for the identity, ethos, and aspirations of both communities. In every speech, May trashes by omission the identity, ethos, and aspirations of Northern nationalists. She has chosen to side with the DUP in an unprecedented and unnecessarily detailed and unequivocal fashion. The effect is that she has taken sides against nationalists, Catholics, which has produced alienation and polarization unseen for over 30 years. Each and every demand of the DUP is granted, none of the demands too obviously outrageous, but taken together deeply damaging to political progress, much less to any prospect of reconciliation here. Supported by the DUP, the British government has been working to find some maneuver to insert a statute of limitations for security force personnel. That was the part of the collusion aspect. And those government activities involved in collusion, the British government is trying to make it such that they will never be prosecuted, never even be indicted. And at the behest of the DUP, the Irish government has kept at arm's length. One of the most serious developments as a result of DUP objections has been the complete exclusion of the Irish government from any role in negotiations. Previous agreements provided for the Irish government, the involvement of the Irish government as a right, sometimes at the table, sometimes not, but always a participant, and no longer. At the behest of the DUP, the Irish government is kept at arm's length. The best evidence for this is a recent British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference meeting. There was no joint statement, no press conference, and the British didn't even provide a room for the Irish side to hold their own press conference. All of this to mollify the DUP. So things are regressing and not progressing. Now leads me to my conclusions. My hope for Ireland of Ireland, the 32 counties independence, is very bleak. I don't expect to see it in my lifetime. But certainly not with Britain continuing to govern, and certainly not if they're continuing to govern with the DUP. The 1914 and the Government Ireland Act, and to the present, the Brits are adamant that Northern Ireland stay in the UK, some of it to support the Protestants, the Protestant community, but now it's to protect the UK. Because if the Irish are successful in seceding or Irish unification occurs, Scotland will be next, who knows, Wales might be after that, at the end of the United Kingdom. The negative issues that continue are unionist parades, flags and emblems, the legacy and collusion, Brexit, and any mention of United Ireland as far as the Brits are concerned and the Northern Protestants are concerned. And recently, there was a Catholic family who were warned by the police state, the PSNI, to leave an integrated public housing. This is kind of unheard of in this day and age, but yet they've done it. And to my knowledge, they were successful. I haven't heard anything more about it, but the fact that they can even attempt to do that tells you that, you know, nobody's gonna penalize them, and that's ominous. But America has a vested interest in the Good Friday Agreement, and the Brits' deceit and favoritism continues to destroy hope for peace, as so many times before. So how can this be allowed to happen again? And can we prevent these existing and potential tragedies from happening now? We, meaning you and I, must inform our Congress and must demand positive action as relates to the Good Friday Agreement. The Irish activist organizations in this country can only focus on a Good Friday Agreement as regards Brexit. We have no role in Brexit, but since Good Friday Agreement be impacted by Brexit, then we can step in and say something. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we need the help on the part of everyone to contact your own congressman, McGuinness principles as a minimum, but to relate some of this information that's going on to support those elements of the Good Friday Agreement that have either been ignored or are on the verge of collapsing. And the last item would be comprehensive and accurate reporting by the news media, and not propaganda, would be very helpful. I'll leave it at that. If I get any questions. And by the way, my hearing is going a little bit, so if you got a question, yell it out to me or take the microphone. Yes.
So during World War II, Germany did not bomb Ireland?
Oh, they did. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of detail. I told you I didn't want to torture you with all of the details. Oh no, they bombed the Germans bombed the north of Ireland, and they bombed the Republic as well.
I got another question.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it Henry VIII that closed the monasteries and seminaries in Ireland?
I got it. You want to repeat that?
Was it Henry VIII that closed the monasteries and seminaries in Ireland so that the Irish had to go to Europe to become
I can't
priests?
remember that far back. I don't recall. I couldn't tell you.
All right. She says yes, and I believe her.
What's that?
Laura said yes.
Oh, it did. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
It happened in England too.
Okay.
I say that because I went to St. Augustine, and we went down some obscure side street, and it turned out to be the oldest foundation, the oldest wall, the oldest house in America.
Wow.
And it was like Francisco O'Malley.
Oh, yeah. It's all over the world you can find it. I found a place in Seville in Spain, at O'Connell Street. You know. But, you know, you asked the question, Maynooth in Ireland was formed by Queen Elizabeth, I think. But it was primarily as a hint for, it was anti-Catholic, let me put it that way. And it took a long time before Maynooth became a Catholic institution.
But there's more talk about people from the north. I don't know which community, going to the Republic to claim Irish citizenship at their passport. And there's an office in Belfast now to do that. So they don't have to go take the train.
You don't have to what?
They don't have to take the train,
Oh.
get to Dublin to make a claim for Irish citizenship.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
As a just in case, already.
Well, yes, well, I can say, had to do with the Irish citizenship place in Belfast that you get your visa. What are you talking about? The Irish visa?
No, I'm talking about Irish passport.
Oh, the passport. Oh, okay. Okay.
Since all people born and living in Ireland are Irish citizens by law
Yeah.
in the Republic.
Well, there's a rush
I know there's a
in
rush.
Britain for the Irish passports,
Right.
so they stay within the EU. And also, the Irish government is boning up, manpower-wise, for a hard border, whether it occurs or not. But they're expecting the worst out of it. I have no projections on what can happen there.
And what Scotland might do. Scotland had a
Oh, yeah, right.
referendum, I think it was 46 to 53, or 56, or something
Yeah.
like that, to stay or leave. And so if they leave, then Northern Ireland were to stay, and England will lose a lot of money, number one, from the petrol industry. And there's a lot of interest, a lot of advantage for Scotland staying in the EU
Yeah.
because of their oil and fisheries, and their close tie to Norway and Denmark.
Well, you know, whether Northern Ireland or Scotland leaves, or
Right.
the Isle of Man, if any one of them leaves, that's gonna create
Right.
a domino effect. And, you know, Britain is, you know, somebody said, even with Brexit, Britain still has this idea that they're a world power.
Yes.
You know, and they're no longer, that UK is the world power, and they're really not anymore. Well, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Don't forget, our next lecture will be October